Hello, I'm Neil Brighton. I'm the principal admin of Group B today, and I have a couple of cars here today with me that Renault kindly allowed me to use their forecourt for. The first one is my Renault 5 Maxi Turbo, which I've had for going on for nearly 30 years. And my newest car, which is the 206 WRC, and that one is its very first time out.
So, first of all, tell me a little bit about yourself and your background, because like you said, you've been involved in the rallying scene for quite a while.
Like lots of young guys when I was younger, I loved cars. I mean, I originally came from motorbikes and had a need for speed, and then got into cars, and for some reason I got into Renault 5s. I'm not sure quite what went on, but I got into Renault 5s, found out that there were some fast versions for the road, and that sort of led on to this sort of incessant need for the next model up, and over the years I sort of had a number of different models of Renault 5, and a friend called Lyle Armstrong took me out in his Turbo 2 around the roundabout not far from here in Harrow, Norfolk Park roundabout, and just absolutely blew me away sideways around this roundabout. And I'd never been in a car driven sideways before, and certainly not on the public highway. and that was it. I was done for. And so my life from that point onward was focused on the fact that his car had a rallying background, and that sort of drew me into the rally world. And so we're going back to, oh goodness, sort of 1992. No, hang on, yeah, 92-ish. And from that point onwards, I've been involved with cars and rally cars, and have gone off and done events in this country, displays and rallies, and across in Europe. Been over to Ireland and Germany. We've been down to Spain, and it's been just this sequence of, I'm going to go and do that event next, and that one next, and all these historic rally events that where you weren't allowed to use some of the cars, particularly the Renault, which was Group B, you weren't allowed to use on some events early on in the UK. So we would just go abroad and do events there. So my background has always been part of the historic scene, and that to me, as a scene in itself, if you just put all the Group B stuff aside, is a massive scene of people racing cars that are no longer on the cutting edge, but to my mind, it's a bigger scene than the actual main rally scene, because this is where you can get involved.
So, how do you go about recreating a Renault 5 Maxi?
Well, I think you needed to, firstly, I had a little bit of a screw loose. There were a number of factors that came into that. One was not having enough money to buy one. I mean, back at that time in the 90s, I remember there was a Maxi Turbo for sale, and at that time it was 60,000, which in 92, 93 was huge money for a car. And so it was way out of my league, but I was always of a mind that if you set your mind to something, and I'm skilled with my hands, that you could actually do it. And what was really important was to work with the attention to detail, because that was the thing that was either going to make it work or make it just a look-alike. So I set about building the car as you see it there, and my intention was that every small detail that I could possibly achieve needed to be achieved. There might be things that you couldn't achieve, and that you might have to live with, but if you could achieve it, there was no, okay, that'll do. It had to be right. And the car pretty much developed, in a sense, over time, where I developed more skills or had more money, and then you change things, and it ended up becoming the car that you see there.
What was the starting point? What did you get a shell, or did you manage to get hold of some panels, or what did you actually have at the beginning?
I had my next door neighbour where I used to live. His wife had this 1100cc Renault 5 TL that she used to commute in. It was her normal car, and I was a motor mechanic at the time, and so I always used to take the car and MOT it and service for her. And eventually it failed an MOT, and the repair cost to her and to her husband was going to be too much. So I said, well, can I buy it off you? And so they were quite happy, and I think I paid 60 quid for the body shell at the top of the whole car. At the time it was running, just didn't have an MOT, and then
it went for an MOT and came back as a 5 Maxi.
Well, it ended up being a 5 Maxi, but it came back, and I pulled the entire car apart and threw everything, and it was really weird because you sort of mentally think, well, I'll be able to keep this and this, but apart from the doors and the body shell, you just threw everything away. It was like, just as well it only cost 60 quid because I haven't kept anything. It's all gone in the bin, and then you set out based on pictures and images and old VHS video of the original cars, looking at what did they do, what bits were on it, how did they appear, are they accessible, and I was in what was called the Group B car club at the time, and we had a guy called Alan Eisner who was the Group B, the Renault 5 registrar. He was quite helpful. Peter Meany, they gave me lots of paperwork, which photocopied paperwork of all the bits and the part numbers, and pardon me, and that worked really well because it gave me dimensions. It told me where things could come from, and lots of stuff I went to Renault and bought, and other things we had fabricated based on the dimensions. And so panels I bought from a company in France who weren't particularly helpful at the time, but they did eventually send the stuff, and we went from there, and have gone on ever since, just getting it, if something comes up that I haven't noticed after 30 years and I see it in a picture, I go, oh no, that's got to be done as well. So you end up just doing it all.
So attention to detail.
Attention to detail.
So engine.
Yeah.
Talk me through that, because that's to the uninitiated, they're just going to, they'll want to know every detail.
Well, the engine on the Maxi was 1527cc 8-valve push-rod, similar to the engine that you could find in Renault 5 Gordini or Gordini turbos. It was an 840 series engine, very basic. I had a Renault 5 turbo Gordini, and the engine was much the same to look at. Obviously lots of things were different, and so I started with one of those as a base, and then we had to change the crankshaft and the pistons and rods to get the longer stroke, and the bore to get it up to 1527 cc's, different compression ratio. Head work was done to get the valves to work properly, different camshafts. I mean, it was a wholesale deconstruction, reconstruction. Again, another load of parts just thrown in the bin and new parts fitted, different oil pumps. I mean, it just went on and on and on, different turbochargers, different inlet manifolds, different exhaust manifolds, the whole shebang. And when you look in there, you see a rocker cover from what looks like a Renault 5, but I can assure you everything else is pretty much different.
So, how long have you had the car? After what you just said, I can't say finished, but have you had the car running in events?
To be honest, I took the car to events long before it was finished, which probably wasn't the best idea at the time because it got a reputation for breaking down. And really, I was doing a lot of development in the public gaze when I shouldn't have. Should have just taken it to private tracks and did the testing there. So that didn't help it at the beginning. But in terms of finished, that's a strange term because I'm always going to see something where I go, I could have done that. But as a car that you can get in and go and do a rally event, I would say it was finished maybe 15, 16 years ago. It was finished, and anything else has just been cleaning up, restoring, get rid of that part, put a new one on, and just maintaining it. And lifing components has become a really important issue. Learning how quickly the thing will go wrong if you leave something on too long, and that's also really important. So you do find that you have to life everything and then just take it apart, even though it's working, put something else on, and just do it again, make the part again and go again.
Given that this is so close to an original 5 Maxi, is it becoming more difficult to use in terms of not so much its value, because to you it's priceless, but in terms of the difficulty in getting hold of components to be able to keep it going?
I think definitely it got like that for a time, but now there are lots of companies who are remanufacturing parts for the cars, all the Renault 5 range, and that's really handy. You've got 3S Development, you've got Turbo Alpine, he's doing stuff. You've got a few companies making stuff that if you needed something, you could get it. Obviously it's still fairly pricey, but I was fairly skilled, as I say, with machines, so I did a lot of stuff myself and I could remanufacture those parts myself. It is the case that I wouldn't really want to crash the car and have to try to find a body shell and go again. That would start to get really pricey, so you do need to sort of drive it with a little bit of sensitivity. That doesn't mean you won't drive it, because I will, and I do, and I have crashed it, but luckily not too badly. But I think that cars like this, especially when you've got, they're there to be driven, and I've always said to myself, when the day comes when I don't want to drive it anymore, it becomes a museum piece, I will just sell it, because I don't believe it's meant to just sit still for months on end doing nothing, or years on end. I think it's meant to be driven.
So what are the immediate plans for the car? Because you did mention a little bit to me earlier.
Yeah, I actually wanted to strip the car down because it's long overdue for a restoration. It's done an awful lot of work, and probably at this point in time, in the last 10 years, it's done more work in the UK than any other Renault 5 in the historic scene. I know of the people who've got Renault 5s, and I know that this has done more rally and display events than anybody else's car. And it's due for a restoration, which will happen very shortly. Perhaps sort of the middle of the year it'll come off the road and just disappear. Right now it's got to do the Mintex, and it's got to do the John Price Memorial in April, and then after that it'll probably disappear for a while I strip it right back and restore it a bit.
Mick Strafford, thank you very much for agreeing to talk to us. Tell us the inspiration for this car, because there's a story behind why you did it.
Well, I'd been a Vauxhall fan ever since my father bought his first new car, which was a Vauxhall Viva in 1971. And I've always had this connection with them. And when historic rallying started with the post-historic class, that then enabled us to use some of the older stuff that I like the Forenzas. But the problem with them is the engines were not easy to get parts for. And I thought, I'm going to have a look on the internet and see if there's anything else out there. I knew I had a friend who got one of these cars, but his was a road car. And the rules state that you've got to be able to prove that a car was used on rallies in period. And so I did some surfing on the internet and found this and thought, right, great, that's where I'm going to go to. So I managed to get hold of one of the guys who rallied one of these over in South Africa. And I rang him up and I said, can you remember the specification of the car? And he said, oh, I don't know, it's 30 odd years ago, I'm not sure that I can do that, but I'll give it some thought, I'll send you a fax. Anyway, true to his word, a couple of days later, a fax arrived and it said, Dear Mick, they built 100 of these cars to homologate them for racing. I thought we could use this as a rally car. They told me it would never work. They were wrong, it did. If you do this, this, this and this to the car, you will annihilate escorts. Kind regards, Jan. And to be fair, I took this to the Motorsports Authority, which is now Motorsport UK. I took that to them and said, this is the specification that we've been told they ran in, and they said, yeah, great, go for it. So we built it over a period.
So explain for the uninitiated who haven't even seen the car yet, right? It's not a normal Forenza engine. They did something a bit special. They
did, yeah. They managed to get hold of, I think it was 104 5-litre engines from America, which you'd think to yourself, well, surely that's not difficult. But back then, when the the boss of GM South Africa contacted America and said, can we have these engines? They said, how many do you want? He said, we want just over 100. They said, no, we'll do you 10 or we'll do you 10,000, but we're not doing 100. And this guy pestered and pestered and pestered until eventually they did. So they sent over the engines, they sent over some 4-speed Muncie gearboxes, and a guy called Basil Van Rooyen over in South Africa put these cars together with a fair bit of help from General Motors. They started racing them and the things were incredibly successful. They were a lot quicker than the V8 Capris and were doing really well. And then unfortunately, the fuel crisis hit in 1973 and that was the end of it. So they disbanded the team, they sold the cars off. The race cars, they're supposed to have been broken for spares, and certainly the rally cars were broken as well, so none of them exist. So what we did with this is we built the best replica that we could do of the car back in its day. And we brought it out in 2010, and then we've been using it ever since, and it's just been a fantastic journey.
At Western, when I was there, this is the only car that got more attention than the Group B cars. It was the loudest car, the most spectacular car, and it was instantly crowd favourite, which I presume is a lot of what it was aimed at. But you've got a Camaro V8, 4-speed gearbox,
4-speed Muncie gearbox.
Rear axle?
Volvo. Yeah, it's a Volvo. I think it's either a 240 or a 940, 960.
I think it'll be a 940 or 960 because ours has got an automatic. It comes with a limited slip diff.
Ah, right.
So it's that.
So that's probably this has got a limited slip diff as well.
Having the axle.
Yeah, that's what they used back in the day, and we found it to be a really, really strong axle, which it needs to be, as you can see.
You know, my dad's going to be so happy because Vauxhall with a Volvo axle is what we're driving now.
Yeah, absolutely. They're an amazing thing. It was really one man's vision, which was Basil Van Rooyen, who wanted to do this. I believe he fell out with the Ford team manager, and he approached General Motors and said, "Look, I want to do this." And interestingly, the guy who backed him from GM, the boss of GM South Africa, was a guy called Bob Price. And Bob Price left there, came to Vauxhall, saw Fords winning the RAC rally year in, year out, and said to a guy called Bill Blydenstein, who was running the Works Vauxhall team back then, what do we need to do to win the RAC? And he was the guy that then sorted out the Chevette HS. So the guy's been brilliant, absolutely brilliant. He's long dead now, sadly, Bob Price. I'd have loved to have met him. But yeah, I was always hoping that this car was going to be popular with the spectators. It's probably exceeded my hopes. It seems more popular than that. Some people don't get it. Some people, are not really into V8s. But
there was a little kid right next to me. Must have been about 4.
Yeah.
And he was going, the growly car's coming.
Oh, can you?
The staff is here. Look out. Stand back.
I know I can see
Yeah, that just about sums it up. Yeah, it's great. Western Park, we get the opportunity to run the ultra loud exhaust that we've got, every so often, and Western was one of those events. It was great. It's a megaphone, so it's not just louder than a standard exhaust, it actually amplifies the sound, so it's shatteringly noisy. And people ask me why I'm deaf, and I don't think I need to explain that now.
To drive, I mean, okay, you've got all that. I mean, how much power is it?
This has got what we call it a demonstration engine. This one's 555 brake horsepower. Yeah, and you can hoon about in it like I do, and generally, make a fool of yourself and so on, but try and entertain the fans. Or you can drive it like Jimmy McRae drives it, because Jim's driven this now. It's got to be well over 20 times on events. He did the British Historic Rally Championship with it and helped us with the development of the car. And if you drive it like him and you feed the power in and you drive it properly, then it's amazing just how quick this thing is.
Well, Mick phoned me just out of the blue, and I didn't know Mick or anybody or this car was even there. He said, "Is it true that you were invited over to South Africa to drive the V8 Magnum Forenza?" I says, "Aye, I was actually, but GM Dealer Sport, they wouldn't allow me to go because it was like..."
Well, it was. If I remember correctly, it was this sort of a skunk's work job, wasn't it?
They didn't allow me to go because any time it was like the week before a rally here,
right.
And they said no, I couldn't go. So he says, "You never got to drive one." He says, "You want to drive one?" I said, "How would you mean?" He says, I've built one. I said, "Yeah." "I know, definitely." We went, and first time I drove, I thought, "Oh, Jesus." Then we went and we did, we did Rally Legends. We did the Rally Legends. He was invited over to the Rally Legends and drove it over there. Well, I drove it there, and we were getting on all right with him, keep making changes to it because it handled something terrible. It was just a car with a load of power, but nothing else. But we kept changing the shockers and change bits and pieces. Then, and we thought we'll try wider wheels in the front. So we put wider wheels in the front, and we did in the other stage. And bloody hell, we came down to absolute flat out down to it was the big bales, like a chicane through the bales. Foot in the brake, foot went right to the floor. Oh, so hit the bale side, or hit that one and that one. So drove out, but the exhaust was hanging off it, and then I could smell petrol. And I thought, bloody hell! So we stopped, and it burst the fuel tank. No, it actually burst the floor here. Right.
It's okay.
The floor. It was the fuel tank or the fuel pumps or something anyway. The fuel pouring out this, and this exhaust was trailing in the ground. I thought, oh
goodness, yeah.
So the finish up was stopped in the road section and reversed it over onto the curb, and it was like the grass verge, and the fuel ran out. Then we thought, right, we'll get the car up. So they towed the car up to the service area. And had a look at it, and when they'd put the 8-inch wheels in the front, the wheel was rubbing in the caliper. So I thought, well, they fixed it, and we went on. We did the rest of it the following day, I think. And I thought, oh no, I'm not. And he said, "What about doing a rally?" I said, we'll need to go testing then. So we went testing, and we actually got the car. To finish up, the car wasn't bad. But the spectators loved it. The V8, the roar of the V8, and to be honest, I enjoyed driving it as well. Yeah. And with some good results with it. Quite often, because it was the class we were in, we weren't in the Mark II Escort class, we were in the Mark I Escort class because of the age of the car. I think we won our class most times we were out, and we did the the Roger Albert Clark rally with it, and I think we finished 11th overall, and we were the first non-Ford escort. They were all Mark II escorts in front of us. We were the first non-escort.
So a lot of happy memories of that car.
Yeah, no, definitely, no.
That was frightening. That was a little skewer, wasn't it? Oh, speaking of fun.
It really is fast. And the suspension's great on it. So it hooks up really, really well. And we're allowed to run wider tyres now than we were at first. At one time the rules were we could run 185/70s and that was it. Well, now we can run slightly wider ones than that and better rubber, and you can get so much more traction. And if you're taking it seriously and you're on a proper event, you can really get this thing to shift. Yeah. But by the same token, it's also very, very easy to light up the bike tyres.
But I bet you with the power and the handling, it's actually surprised. I have a gut feeling that this is actually very relatively easy to drive, because it must communicate quite quickly when it's going to go and slide easily, and it's easy to catch, I imagine. Yeah,
one of the things you can do with this car that's harder with an Escort is you can start the back wheels spinning and then you can keep them spinning. So whereas with an Escort, they tend to, so they'll get so far sideways on tarmac and then they'll try to straighten themselves up. With this, because you've got so much power, you can just keep sliding it, and it's just tremendous fun. Jim was once asked, which was his favourite rally car of all time, and he said the Metro 6R4, because it was Group B. He was in the middle of the Group B thing. It was exciting. The car was amazing. And then somebody said, well, what was the most fun? And he pointed at this and said, that by a country mile. And I think it doesn't get any better than that for me, because I've been a fan of Jim since the 70s.
Me too, yeah. And him and Russell Brooks.
And Russell Brooks, that era was just amazing.
Together were brilliant, weren't they?
Yeah, it was incredible. Because we've been on such a journey with this car. We've done so many things with it. We managed to get Jan Hettemer over from South Africa to come and drive it. We've had Stig Longfist drive it, and he loved the car, and it's just been wonderful. And now that COVID's hopefully more under control, we'll be able to get out a lot more next year and try and do some more events with the car. But we've done events that I never really I always wondered whether I'd like them or not. We've done a couple of hill climbs, and they've been fantastic. And some of the demonstration rallies that we do are brilliant. And we've been out to Spain with it. It's been out to Spain 3 times, and the reaction we get out there is just insane. So it's been brilliant. I've met all sorts of people. I've met some of my heroes, and it's just been fantastic.
That basically is what it's all about.
This is the thing, at the end of the day, I always feel that I'm there, if I'm doing a demo, I'm there to try and entertain the spectators. And you'll see pictures afterwards with people with great big grins on their faces and so on. And I think, that's what it's all about. That's what I want to do. I want to entertain. I'm not the fastest driver by a long chalk. Malcolm Wilson from Ford, I gave him till I was 60 to ring me with the offer of a works drive, but it never happened. It just never happened. So I've given that up now. It's not going to happen. So seriously, no. I mean, I've never been quick enough to get anywhere on rallies. But what I can do is entertain people with this car, and it's just brilliant.
I'd say you definitely give people the biggest smile.
Thank you. That's what it's all about for me.
Okay, so this is a customer car. Tell me a bit about this.
Well, we started building this car a few years ago, and this was meant to be a replica of one of the race cars that they ran out there. And we started it, and then we got busy at work and put it on one side for a while and so on. And we didn't get around to finishing the thing off. And we've got a long-term customer here called Jonathan Gale. And Jonathan borrowed my Forenza to do an event in Mallorca and absolutely adored it. He just loved the car. So when he saw that we got this body shell that was part finished, he asked us if we could buy it. And I thought, well, yeah, all right, it's going to be ages before we get this thing done. Let's do that. So we built this car as a bit of a dual purpose one. You can run it in the setup that it's here, which is similar to my car, in that it meets the historic specifications. So we've got narrow arches and so on, and it's got the right roll cage in, and you've got the smaller brakes on it and what have you. But he wants to do more events in Mallorca. So for Mallorcan events, the thing it looks crazy. It's got huge arches on it, enormous wheels, big brakes, big engine. It just looks fantastic. And we're hoping that early next year we're going to be able to get it back out there again, and then he's going to try and do probably half a dozen of the events over there. But this is everything that we've learned from my car we've put into this one to make this that little bit better.
Wow. So it's in terms of spec, is it similar in terms of the engine and...
Yeah, for historic rounds, we're stuck with a 5-litre engine. We've got to run smaller brakes and so on. There are strong restrictions on what you can do. But in Mallorca and a lot of the European events, the restrictions are a lot less. So he can do things with the car out there that we wouldn't get away with over here. I suppose I could do for demonstration rallies, I could do that if it came down to it. But I'm happy with TDH. TDH is my baby, and I'm happy with it as it is. But for certain events, with Jonathan, I wouldn't say the sky's the limit, but it's pretty much as far as you're going to get with one of these things. And it's just a sensational looking car.
Right, Neil, you showed us your Renault 5 Maxi, which is incredible. But behind us is something new, and I know that it's so new that you're literally haven't seen it outside the workshop yourself until today. Do you want to tell us what it is?
Well, this is a 206 WRC recreation. Okay, I'm quite happy to use the term recreation because I did the work, and but I've been so meticulous in the build, and some people say very anal about how it appears, and the attention to detail has been so important that I can actually comfortably call it a WRC car. This is its very first time outside of my workshop. It's been a 2-year build, and this is the first time I've seen it outside. It's the first time the two cars have been together, but when I got it out and was looking around it, the smile was just on my face, was like, wow, this is just amazing, and I built it, but you lose sight of it when it's in the workshop.
Okay, now I know from just looking around the car there's an incredible amount of work. So tell me what you started with and how you turned it into a WRC.
Again, not dissimilar to the Renault. I started with a 206 1.1 litre road car, which I'd got in from Holland because it would be left-hand drive. That would afford me the left-hand drive, some of the left-hand drive components like the rack and certain of the bits. And then I took it, had it MOT'd to get the chassis number into the Vosa system. And then straight away after that, the whole thing was stripped down to a complete bare shell, and similar to the Renault, everything was thrown away. And I kept on this, as opposed to the Renault, I kept a photo library of everything that was happened of this, and it was literally just this bare shell on stands in my workshop. And I looked at it and I thought, right, we're going to start cutting this thing up, and we're going to start building a racing car out of this body shell, which essentially is what all the manufacturers did. There were, I have to say, there were points where I thought I'd bitten off far more than I could chew. But then you'd go home, sleep on it, and think, nah, I can do this, I can do this. And now, as opposed to the time of the Renault, there is so much more information because of the internet, which I didn't have at the time when I was building the Renault. I have so much more information, so much more photography, so much more paperwork that you can get hold of, that it was actually, in many respects, easier to build. And although, having said that, it's a far more sophisticated build than I'd done with the Renault, because the level of finish that's on a WRC car was very different from most Group B cars, and I needed to replicate that. I needed to make sure that I preserved the functionality that the WRC car would have had. So it had to be four-wheel drive, which it is. It has front, center and rear diffs. It has a handbrake disconnect unit so you can do your handbrake turn, and you know, all the diffs are sort of semi-active. It's on proper rally suspension. You know, everything was there were bespoke subframes front and rear to carry all of this, all the wishbones, all the suspension, to carry the diffs. It has the 2-litre Peugeot engine, which was stripped down, forged, rods, pistons, crank, cams, everything, bespoke manifolds, inlet and exhaust. I mean, the whole layout was a complete copy of what Peugeot had done with the 206 WRC. But even with their cars, the layouts changed so many times that I had to actually choose a layout and go, I'm going to go with that. I'm going to do that one, and maybe add that little bit in there because it's a bit. But essentially, it was one of the early shapes, and you know, it's got a 5-speed sequential dog engagement gearbox with flat shift and launch control. It's got everything on there that you would expect to find in a WRC car, and I felt that you couldn't do it justice and say WRC unless you did put those things on it. It cost an awful lot of money and an awful lot more time, but I'm really super happy with the result at the end of it.
Talk me through. So, I mean, the bodywork was that. How did you get hold of that? And the roll cage, things like this. I mean,
the bodywork I bought in from France. And now the original WRC cars, they would have all been pressed steel, but that wasn't actually available. But the panels were mouldings off of an original car. But they're all done. All the panels are, apart from the doors and the body shell, they're all carbon Kevlar as opposed to fiberglass. So I put more money into. I want the panels to be light. I want them to be strong, and I want the appearance to be absolutely right. So the panels had to come from a WRC car rather than a sort of a kit-looking car. It looks like it, but it isn't quite right. So every panel on there represents exactly the shape that you would have had on the WRC car. Things like the roll cage. I mean, it was a three and a half weeks it took me to cut and weld that into the car, copying the images and the drawings. Went home many evenings with arc eye and fed up and blocked nose, but you know, it was well worth it in the end.
I know that this is not going to have a life driving around the North Circular.
No.
This has got a more interesting life in store.
Yeah, this was built to take some of the workload off the Renault, and certainly to get the Renault to have a time to be restored. But this is going to go out and do lots of the historic events. It'll, you know, initially I might really want to just do some of the softer events so it doesn't get bashed up straight away and get all the stone chips. But so you might do Shelsley, Walsh, the hill climbs. I'm going to do plenty of the Rally 22 events with the car where you're not putting it into a really difficult situation. I'll do selected events that Tim Nash puts on. But it's built as a rally car. It's not built as a lookalike. Everything underneath, all the wishbones, the rose joints, everything on there is rally spec. There's nothing on there that was road spec or anywhere fast road, and that was the intention from the outset. This is a rally car, that's it.
Bit of competition between the lorries there.
Yeah.
So your reaction to the car, I mean, this is straight out the box for you.
It is.
So I can see the smile. It's like, you know, a dad with his newborn. What's your feelings now that you're at this end of the project?
Well, the funny thing is when over the course of the 2 years where I've been building it, it's in the workshop, and you see the small changes, and but you kind of lose sight of the car a little bit because you see it almost every day when you go in and out and you're doing your regular work, and so maybe some of the magic goes away until maybe there's a significant point in the build where you go, oh no, that looks good, and then so to get it outside and look at it, it just looks like a very, very different car to the one that I wheeled out of my workshop earlier this morning. And you know, I'm looking at it thinking, wow, is that mine? And that's not meant to be a boast. It's quite overwhelming because it represents a lot of my time and a lot of effort.
Yeah, it's like a workshop build. You are focused entirely on the build. Then all of a sudden that stopped.
Yeah.
And you're looking at a finished car outdoors in a different environment. It must be quite overwhelming.
It definitely is, and watching people come along and look at the car, and even on the road behind us, people stopping with their cars and having a look at the Renault. I mean, it's quite interesting in actual fact. Most of the people who've come out have appreciated the Renault more because they're men of a certain age. And I think the younger people would look at the Peugeot because they're going to, you know, the older guys like us will remember the Jean Bragnottis, the Harry Vatnans and people like that. And the younger ones are sort of remembering Richard Burns, Colin McRae, people like that. And so it's interesting, you know. I'm just happy that it's more or less at the end. The car still has to go off and have its engine mapped properly, which will happen on the 24th of this month, and then after that it will be lots of private testing to get it set up, get the spring rates right, and check what you haven't done right, and anything that shows up, and resolve them, and then off to do some events.
Right, there's one question I want to drop in at another point, but of all the cars you could choose, how did you come to the Peugeot 206? I mean, there's so many potential. I mean, I love the 206. I was a big fan of them, but I was just wondering for you what it was that made you choose a 206 and not one of the others. Because there's actually, I think I'll probably answer my own question. There's plenty of Subarus out there.
There are. I loved the 206 when it was in competition. I remember the first time I saw one on Wales Rally GB back in 2001, and this thing went past me. I was hiding in some bushes where you weren't supposed to stand as a spectator, and Marcus Grönholm came round in this 206, flew round this corner, drifted this car around this long right-hander and disappeared off and changed gear, went pop like this, and I thought, I need one of those, I need one of those, I need one of those. And I looked at it much later and realised it was impossible, because the car didn't have a road going counterpart from which you could have an easy jump start. Yeah. So I could have bought a Subaru, it's already four-wheel drive, it's already got the engine in, and then strip it and do what I need to do and go.
And have an easier life.
And had an easier life, and the 206 didn't have that. But I've never been one for the easy thing, and I did look at the Focus, but then a friend of mine wanted to do that build, and he actually asked me to do the build for him, and we started, and somewhere in the middle, somewhere early on, he pulled the plug. And once that had happened, he sort of said, well, you could carry on, but what would have happened there, it would forever have been my old car to him. It would have been, oh, that's my old car, and I didn't want that. And then I said, I didn't want to buy a 206 from anybody in the UK where they could go, oh, that was the car such and such. I said, no, me getting a separate car, and I'm going to start from scratch and build the car that I really wanted, which was the 206 WRC.
I'll tell you why I love the 206 WRC for me, because I love the 206 T16.
Yeah. 205.
Sorry, 205
T16. Yeah.
Yeah, I love the 205 T16 and the 405
Yeah, the Pikes
T16, which would have been the Group S car.
Let's not wander into Group S because that.
But when the 206 WRC came along, it was like Peugeot's back.
Yeah, it
and
really was.
It had that sort of warm feeling to me. I had high hopes for the 206 road car being another 205, and it wasn't quite. But I mean, the rally cars definitely were.
Yeah, and genuinely, I would never have gone out and purchased a 206 road car because it didn't appeal to me, which is odd. The shape wasn't aggressive enough. It just missed the mark a little bit.
Yes.
And they didn't offer that real boy racer version, and I think that they could have hit the ball out of the field if they would have just brought out a slightly wider arch. It could have remained front wheel drive, slightly wider arched,
and just drove a little bit with the balance of the 205. It would have been great.
If they could have done that, they would have smashed it. They would absolutely have smashed it. But nonetheless, the rally car was something special, and one of the main reasons for me was that there weren't any in the UK. You don't go to an event and see a four-wheel drive 206 WRC anywhere. You don't. I mean, I went to Salon Privé, Blenheim Palace last year, and they had two from the Burns collection, and you've seen them at Rally Day, but they won't do lots of work and they won't do anything. They're part of a collection, and that's how it should be, because they are special cars. But you won't turn up at an event and see a four-wheel drive 206 going around. And I just thought, you will see Escorts, you will see Subarus, you will see Mitsubishis, you will see. I just thought 206.
That is a beautiful explanation. Neil, thank you so much for letting us look at your cars. And thank you so much for Group B today as well, because it really is a nice way to remember the cars as well for me, because I remember them back in the day as well.
Yeah.
I'm old enough, so I sort of like thank you for that as well.
No worries at all. It's been a pleasure to bring them out and for you to take the time with me.
We liked this car, but we weren't quite sure why he hasn't quite finished delivering.
Yeah, I suppose they're worried about rolling.
Hi, I'm Robin Hamilton, and this is my latest build, work spec Lotus Sunbeam.
So, as you said, you built it yourself. Well, this is a complete shell up from the beginning.
Yeah, well, I've been sort of building the car for a few years and gathering the right suspension and axle and everything for it. It's all work stuff that's on the car. The engine I did get done by Phil Davidson. Wanted to treat myself for a big birthday I had, and I asked Phil if he would do an engine for me, and he agreed, and I'm certainly not disappointed. The power that's coming out of the engine is incredible. So,
and you mentioned he built the engines for the works.
Yeah, Phil was the original engine builder for Henry Townend, Tony Pond, and Russell Brooks. And they reckon this engine's as good, if no better, than their engine. So if I can do it justice, I'll be well impressed. And
you mentioned that some of the parts that you've managed together have been from interesting cars in themselves.
Aye, I think the axle was out of Russell Brooks's car, and the front suspension originated out of Brooks's car as well. So I'm told anyway. But there's so many stories in rallying, you don't know what to believe. Yeah. But it's certainly all good stuff.
Yeah. So, from the shell, I mean, presumably the biggest problem with a car like this is finding the shell that's in one piece.
It does.
So was that a lot of work in that?
Yeah, well, getting a good shell is a big problem. You've got to be prepared to cut a lot of rot out of them now, because every Sunbeam shell carries quite a bit of rot. But I was lucky this one had been dry stored, and I sat in it for years before we started building it. And no, it's turned out nice. It's a strong car. We've even put the cage in it ourselves. So we've done absolutely everything. I know the car inside out, which is handy if you go to an event.
And I think, was it the first time out was at Weston Park?
Yes, I was sort of more or less invited to go and do a rally at Weston Park. It was rally history. And that was a cracking day out. First time I'd ever driven it, and it was a iconic stage that they used to use on the main RAC rally. So it was like stepping back in time, I suppose, for us all.
And obviously you've driven other Sunbeams, but straight out of the box, how did it feel?
It felt absolutely great. We had a wee issue with the brakes, and I still have. I think I've sorted it now, but I couldn't get the thing to stop. That was my biggest issue. So hard and out stuff at every main corner. Hopefully I've resolved that now. But there again, short and twisty, nice and tail out motor and everywhere. It's a great thing to drive.
And is this going to be used in historic rallying? Or?
Yeah, that's my plan. We're heading away to Barbados to do Rally Barbados in the historic section, and that the car gets shipped away in a few weeks' time. So that's the next main event. We done Ingleston last weekend, and we had a sort of mixed day. We had a couple of wee mechanical issues and a couple of wee other things going on, but on the whole the car was superb, and it came away for there, you know, with a lot of improvements done. So.
We liked this car, but we weren't quite sure why he hasn't quite finished delivering. It's nice.
In terms of sourcing original parts, was there anything that was this a long-term project or?
Yes, well, it took a long time to source parts. Like the gearboxes are really hard to get now. The competition ZF gearbox, and I was lucky to get a good one. My friend was selling up his rally kit, and he had a spare gearbox for his Escort, and it was a really minter of a gearbox. They're worth a lot of money now, the gearboxes.
Well, thank you very much for letting us look at the car.
No, not a problem at all.
And I'll get some shots, and good luck with Barbados.
Thanks very much.